Okay, so I hope people can hear now, but we are there. So if people could let us know whether you can hear us, that would be good. But I believe that we are live now. Hello, everybody. This is Georgie Oldfield. I'm a physiotherapist and founder of SERPA. And with me is Carole Randell. And Carole is, well, I'm going to let you tell your story, Carole, but we've been running bits about your success story that you've written on our website over this week, where you spoke about your recovery, well, first of all, your diagnosis of fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, and then your recovery. So I think what we'll do is, let me just put this on to speak with you and ask you, Carole, if you could just start with maybe telling us a little bit about you and your situation before you actually developed any symptoms.
Yeah, of course. And thanks, Georgie, for the invite today and opportunity to share this with other people to know that recovery from fibromyalgia is really possible. So it goes back quite some time to 2005. I was working as a practice manager for a busy GP practice, long hours, bombing up and down motorways to get there, being stuck in traffic to get there, and starting work at 7 in the morning and probably arriving home at 7 at night. So yeah, lots of things going on, and it was a very stressful job in itself because we were quite a large practice as well, and we had small branch surgeries to manage those and the people in it. Right. I was also at that particular time doing an additional postgraduate diploma in strategic management, whilst also training to do and become a psychotherapist. So very full on.
Yes, definitely. Gosh. A lot of work going on, and sounds like not really putting yourself first at all either.
No, absolutely not. I mean, in the background, of course, there's all the family stuff going on. Live next door to my in-laws, and my father-in-law had rheumatoid arthritis, so quite a lot of support needed for them as well. Yes. And children that were going into teenage years and exams and all sorts of things. I would not recommend having your own exams and your teenagers doing exams at the same time.
I could believe that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask a few more questions, Carole, while we wait for people to post any questions they have, and hopefully some of them have read your recovery story on the SERPA website, which is serpa.org, S for sugar, IR, P for Peter, A.org. We have Christine saying hello from Boston, USA, and we're apparently being heard loud and clear. So, when did you first start to realize that maybe you weren't, well, maybe you didn't realize you weren't coping with it all at the time? When did you start noticing you were having symptoms anyway?
Yeah, I used to have the most crippling headaches that started in the back of my neck, which was put down to stress, because everything is put down to stress, isn't it? Yeah. And we have a terminology when you work in healthcare called corridor doctoring. So you never actually went to see a GP, but we just had a little chat in the corridor, and they said, yeah, I'll just give you a prescription for that. So that's kind of how it started for me. And it gradually went on from there, from real awful fatigue and flu-like symptoms,
right,
IBS, and that was just some of the stuff that was kind of going on. And then I was diagnosed with an underactive thyroid, so we put down the chronic fatigue for that, but it just did not get better. It just gradually got worse and worse and worse. So yeah.
So how long did it take before things got to that point? I know you mentioned in the success story that things got so bad that you weren't able to carry on working, for example, and yet you were struggling to get any real diagnosis.
Yeah. Eventually one day I was just sort of at work, and I was sat at my desk and just tears were streaming down my face, and my body and my mind had just completely shut down. I just couldn't do anything. Right. So then that really started what I call the crash phase. for chronic fatigue. So from that point on, I didn't work for 3 years, and it took almost 4 years to get a diagnosis of, first of all, chronic fatigue, and then also fibromyalgia, because I had various other symptoms coming in. It was clearly showing that I'd got fibromyalgia as well, but it took a lot of GP visits initially, various medication, different prescriptions for different things, then being referred out for individual symptoms to different consultants. Nobody kind of had an answer, and till finally I went to see a rheumatologist, and he sort of like poked me around. He said, "Yep, I think you've got fibromyalgia. Here's a leaflet, but just realise you'll probably end up in a wheelchair." And that absolutely floored me. Yes. Absolutely floored me. Wow. Because I was by this time your self-esteem is so on the floor, and your confidence is there's nothing there. For that to happen is really absolutely devastating.
Yes, I can imagine. Wow.
Yeah.
So rock bottom.
Rock bottom.
Yeah. At that point, yes. And when did you begin to realise that there might be a way out?
It became very gradual. I did, like everybody does, a lot of Google searching. Saw lots of different therapists, and nothing really pulled it together. And then I found an online recovery program, the Chrysalis Effect, joined them, and started to look at all these different 8 areas of my life. So it's a very holistic approach to recovery, and started to pick up a bit from there. But I'll be honest with you, it took me 4 attempts to get my head around what my particular issues were, which were very emotional. Very much rooted in adverse childhood experiences, trauma, that type of thing. So it's taken quite a lot to get here.
Yes, yeah. Well, you did it though, so well done.
Yes, I'm pleased to say I have. Yeah.
So what are those 8 areas that you just mentioned then?
So every day I sort of have this little wheel of 8 elements to freedom wheel, which I review. So I'm looking definitely at nutrition, because obviously you have to be physically well to be able to move forward. I look at things like my emotional health. What have I done to be kind to myself today? The environment that I'm in, is it a good environment for me to be living and working in? I look at my lifestyle and I pace out. I don't over sort of commit to things now. I look at all the relationships that are in my life as well. Make sure every day I get up and do something. So I go out for a walk, I do my yoga, and actually I'm working in my life purpose, which is the work that I'm doing today with people.
Right. No, that's fantastic. Yeah. And then you continue doing your psychotherapy. Oh, by the way, people are saying hello from all over the place.
Hi, hello.
And if you've got any questions at all, then do post your questions, and then we'll bring those into the conversation as well. But in the meantime, while we're waiting for some questions, so you then went on and did your psychotherapy training, and when did you complete that out of interest?
In 2014, I finished that, became qualified as a psychotherapist. But I'll be honest with you, in my infinite wisdom, I thought, you know what, I'm going to give practice management another try. So I went back to it again. Didn't work out, so had another crash. So this is looking around, what serves you really. Yeah. And
recognising there's only a certain amount that we can all take on. And it just
absolutely.
Gets to that point when, like I think you mentioned in your story about boom, then something happens and you just can't cope.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think taking on a full-time job and doing other work and training is for anybody would be a huge amount. And in fact, one of the things I encourage people to do is look at the responsibilities they have and consider of those responsibilities, for example, which are prioritized, do they need to prioritize and keep hold of? Which are ones that maybe they could pass on to somebody else, as well as which ones could they maybe tweak, do but maybe in a different way or less often, etc. But yeah, absolutely, these looking at the 8 elements, or as we say, nurturing yourself, the house of health, Serpent's house of health.
Yeah, absolutely, house of health. Yeah,
physically, spiritually. So I know you came across SERPA and you started doing our training. It was a few months ago now, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And at that point, when you've done your psychotherapy, and at that point, how were you physically, mentally, emotionally?
Yeah, I still had some residual issues with pain, particularly neuropathic pain. When I'm under stress, it just attacks different areas of my body, particularly for some reason my right knee, it goes off the scale. So I was very aware that there was still some work to be done, and it was really when I started to learn the SERPA approach and the process that it suddenly one morning I thought to myself, do you know what, this is really working for me as I'm learning about this approach. This is really alleviating those final sort of little symptoms that I've had going on. And I think that's why I've become so passionate about being able to work with clients. And I've already seen quite a difference in the clients that I'm working with by bringing in some of these tools and techniques that you can take away then and use, you know, in your own personal life, which is great.
Absolutely. So, and I think, like many of us, that we've all experienced, everybody has anyway, it's whether they recognize that it's TMS, BPD, mind body symptoms, we've all experienced them. But I think as practitioners, it helps to have experienced it, because we bring that understanding, that empathy with us into our work. But I'm really glad that this enabled you to look at it in a slightly different way, start to, I think, as you said earlier to me, beginning to work more on some of the underlying issues that you haven't done before. So I'm really glad that's happened. We do have a question from Sarah, who says, do you have any fatigue at all now? And if so, how do you manage it?
I'm very lucky. I don't get fatigue, but I do use my pacing. So I'm very aware of not to overcommit myself. And if I do think, actually, there's a big event coming up, I do think to myself, what can I do for my self-care before and after? So that, yeah, it's not about putting yourself in cotton wool or mothballs or anything like that, but it's just knowing what your limits are, what your triggers are, and that type of thing. So yeah, that's what works.
I think it's being sensible, isn't it, Carole?
Yeah.
Which unfortunately you and I in the past have not been, because if you have the sort of personality, in fact, you said to me earlier that you're very driven. I'm driven, overly conscientious, perfectionist. And if that is who you are, then that's that tendency. But I know you said to me earlier that that's how you were, and that's how I was. And it's not changing a personality, is it? It's being able to recognize it and being able to notice, become more emotionally aware and recognize your own limits. Whereas before we ignored the limits that our body was telling us we had because we didn't recognize them. We didn't realize that the headache was actually saying, do you know what, you've taken on too much, or the irritable bowel, or the rash, or the twitching eye. And these are, once you start to understand this, you can not only ensure that even if you do have a symptom, it will resolve, but like you were just saying, it's about looking at our lives and are we having, I would think balance is not a good word, because balance is so hard to balance, say on a seesaw to balance. But this is about, you know, over a few days, do you have some sort of balance where actually you are nurturing yourself in all those different areas? So it's not about trying to manage the pain or manage anxiety. I think it's more about managing our lives and ensuring that we prioritize ourselves and we nurture ourselves.
Yeah, 100% agree with everything you've said there, Georgie. I mean, awareness is a wonderful thing, isn't it? So is hindsight.
Yes.
And if only I'd known then what I know now, I would not have been in that pit of despair at one time that I found myself in.
And looking back now, out of interest, how do you perceive that now? Because people going through this are, you know, obviously very fearful. They've lost hope. They think they'll never get better. And yet there are so many people who have written success stories or on videos who've said they're so glad they went through that because they've learned so much. And it's just interesting now to hear you speaking about how you have regained your life, you're living life how you want to live it, you've recognized your limits of responsibilities and things. So when you look back now, how do you perceive that time?
An absolute gift. I'll be honest with you, it's completely changed who I am. I didn't know who I was before, so it's been a really big learning curve is to understand who I am. It's such an individual journey, although there's a lot of commonalities in it. It's very individual, and I think it's not a one size fits all. It's about finding what works for you, and just being gentle with yourself. My journey started with just learning to breathe again, instead of just breathing from up here, it's just learning to breathe, take those deep breaths. I couldn't do anything else at that particular time because I was just so flat on my back and hadn't got the energy to do anything else. Just start very simply.
Sorry, I'm so glad you mentioned that, the breathing, because we've been talking about this in the Mind Body Wellness series of webinars, and just talking about the importance of breathing and how the fight or flight response to breathing is breathing up here all the time, which takes up more energy because it's needing more muscle power to breathe rather than, so learning to breathe in a more relaxed fashion then helps us integrate everything else. And it leads, actually, what you just said earlier, leads into another question from Andrea, who says, did you struggle to find out what emotional traumas in your past were the original triggers?
I don't think struggle's quite the right word, Andrea. It was about accepting the fact that what happened was trauma because it was my norm growing up. I didn't know any different. I sort of don't remember or hadn't remembered a lot of it. I'd pushed everything down, and that was what was making me so driven. I wasn't stopping long enough to actually realize I needed to deal with this stuff. So it was coming out in other ways in my body. I would just say it is about slowing yourself down, stopping long enough to breathe, and then starting to very gently with support get that recognition in place that actually this has impacted you to the point of where you are today.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, we have another question. Excuse me. From Jules, how did you find the crossover from when the mind defaults to thinking about pain as a medical problem to constantly reminding it that it's TMS, reminding yourself that it's TMS?
It is a very gradual thing. I mean, it's not a jump from one to another. I think the more, I think it might be easier if I just give an example here. My pain wasn't with me when I was doing something that I really enjoyed doing. I tended to, it just wasn't in my consciousness, wasn't here in my consciousness. It was always there, but it wasn't right at the forefront. So that's how I knew that it wasn't anything structural. It was more around the emotional side of stuff. So when I started to focus on what had happened, and I was going through my own counselling at the time and looking at what happened as I grew up, my pain instantly ramped up. And I'll just give you a very classic example very recently where I was doing some yoga to release the psoas muscle where trauma and emotions are held. And I went to reach out for my yoga mat and my back just went, and I thought, just so typical, isn't it? You're going to go and do something where you're going to go into it and work with it. And this comes up to say, hang on a minute, I'm protecting you here. So I thought that, it's very interesting.
Definitely. And it's about fear. It's how you respond to that, isn't it? You talk to any of the specialist therapists who work in this field, everybody would say that they have occasional symptoms. But it's the reaction that's important. In that, if you go into fear and you start worrying about it, that's when you can actually cause it to persist. Whereas actually, for you and I now, it's okay, all right, what am I not dealing with very well? And actually being very self-compassionate. And I literally just laugh at myself. Okay, what now? And especially at a time like this when everybody is stressed. It is everybody in a different way because everybody's got different circumstances going on. But certainly there's that level of, I wrote a blog last week about the psychological factors or factors that lead us to psychological trauma, which so many are involved in this episode that we're going through. We're in lockdown with, lack of connection, immobility, loss of purpose, meaning in life. And so therefore it's about boosting our self-care in order to deal with that, going on walks in nature and doing more to actually nurture ourselves. Anyway, we have another question. It's time from Tom Riss. How long did it take you to get better? Bear in mind that everybody's different.
Yeah, everybody is different. And initially it's actually getting some sort of clarity on diagnosis, so you know what you're dealing with, really. That can take anything from 18 months to 3 years. It takes 13 weeks to get to see a consultant in the NHS, and it will be even longer now, So my recovery, I would say, took a good 6 years, because actually at the time back then we hadn't got the knowledge base that we have got now, and we did not really understand that mind-body connection at all. It was a bit out there for but now it's becoming much more mainstream. I was on a GP webinar the other night, and they were working with mindfulness themselves as well, discussing about how they could bring that into practice. And for me, that is an absolutely huge leap from my experience when I just went into this downward spiral about what my options were, which was to give me a leaflet and say, you're going to end up in a wheelchair. I mean, there's a massive difference, isn't there? Yes,
absolutely. Okay, so it does depend on the support people have, and as we often say, for some people it is a book recovery, and it's also not just a conscious thing. So many people say to me, I've read all the books, I've done this, I've done that, why am I not better? Because this isn't an academic thing. No. This is not a conscious thing that we're doing. For me, any symptoms I had at the time I read the books, they did just resolve. Because for me, it was an absolute epiphany. But I'd spent 2 years trying to find an answer to all the questions that I had. And this finally, Dr. Sarno's books finally answered them for me. But for many people, they do need more support. And certainly, I say to many people that when I came back from Dr. Sarno, if he had any clients who were struggling, he would refer to his psychotherapy team. And that was, so when I came back here, back in 2007, I set up my own program, but there were no psychotherapists who actually knew about this work. So it was a harder, more challenging experience, but it was, and certainly a steeper learning curve, but it helped me begin to, especially with the evidence base that was coming about as well, and this awareness that was growing, for us to begin really seeing that this is more about the emotion, the neural pathways, than the actual story behind it. And so for some people, yes, psychotherapy, especially with someone who understands this work, can be helpful. And for other people, they don't need it. And it's more about becoming much more emotionally aware, acknowledging the neural pathways. And I think very much it's about having, the importance is working with a psychotherapist like you, who understands trauma, who understands that it's not just about talking about it. And that now, obviously, you have a lot more of the self-empowering strategies that you use and that you can recommend to your clients as well.
I just want to reassure people here, my approach is, and many other psychotherapies these days, don't tend to go back into the trauma because it re-traumatizes. I mean, you as an individual are very aware of what's happened to you and the trauma. And one of the things that we use is a timeline, as you know, Georgie, so people can be very specific and pinpoint. So it's about what those emotions have produced in you, and it's about providing tools and techniques for you to manage those emotions and recognize them and journal about them, all that sort of thing. Things have moved on so much from when I initially started, seeing clients, which was just literally sitting, listening to them and just very gently saying something or reflecting back. But now it's so different, the approach, you know. It's very much more about coaching that person to understanding their needs and why they've been driven to where they are today, really.
And I think also it does depend on the type of training that a psychotherapist has had, and also their awareness. Just as with a physiotherapist or an osteopath or a doctor, you know, they will not be able to include this unless they actually understand this. So yeah, no, that's a good point. Thank you, Carole. So let's just look at this next one. Oh yes, okay, so this is from the sender, and it is about counselling. What counselling, if any, did you have for your childhood trauma? Anything you recommend, don't recommend? I think you might have answered a bit there. I've heard talk therapy isn't particularly helpful for childhood trauma. It just reinforces circuits. Again, it just depends how that's dealt with. What did you do, and what are your feelings on this?
Lots of points in that particular question.
And also apparently a lot of people asking those questions.
Personally, I used internal family systems, which is one of the things that we use. Somatic healing as well is another way to do this. When I had my initial counselling for myself, it was to do with adult children of alcoholics, because I grew up in that sort of household. So it was, we looked at inner child work specifically, which you have to be in a certain place and trust the person that you're working with. So it's very specific work around what happened in my life as a child. So that's really how I started to then re-engage with an emotional layer, because I was really up here, you know. I was so closed off that I didn't cry or no emotional stuff. If any emotional stuff happened, I could be the one that was relied on to roll up my sleeves, crack on with it, organize stuff, and sort of caring, end of life care, stuff like that. I just got on with it, I'm not saying I wasn't kind, because kindness is a big thing for me, but actually I could be relied on to not become overly emotionally involved and not be helpful to support. So I was that sort of support for everybody. But then again, that came as a cost to me as well, because that was when I was overgiving but hadn't realized that. And also that there was stuff around validation, all those sorts of things, which I've come to learn about and understand now, about stepping back and allowing people that space to grow, if you like. So I'm not stopping their growth by being overgiving or just stepping into their space so that they don't learn from it as well. This is also on a personal level. So there's a lot of stuff gone on around this. And even now I have one-to-one counselling with my supervisor, because obviously that's part of what I have as my professional, ongoing commitment as well. And just very fascinated by the whole subject of recovery and trauma. So constantly learning. Yes,
I'm sure. And I think that's the thing, isn't it, for people to recognise this is a journey. This is not just a right, let's use this approach to get better. This is what you're talking about, is you gaining an understanding of yourself and being able to look at how you can make changes in your life. And that doesn't necessarily need in-depth psychotherapy, because a lot of that is about, like you mentioned, coaching, mentoring. So we're teaching and supporting. And for some people, yes, psychotherapy, but preferably something, a type of psychotherapy that is related to this work, so that it's more specific, like you say, so somatic experiencing and internal family systems, so quite specific. But many of the things you were saying about then, at the beginning, when you were saying this is about recognising, dealing with things as they're happening day to day, but often that triggers things from the past. But by dealing with the day-to-day, we're also dealing, as long as we allow ourselves to deal with the emotional side, we're allowing ourselves to address the emotional side of the past as well. Okay, so questions are all coming in now. Dan says, thank you for sharing your story. And a number of comments on Dan's apparently, but Dan says, I wondered if you had shared it with the people that had told you that you'd be in a wheelchair.
Actually, no, that's a very good point. Yeah, Dan, I think I might be composing a letter and attaching it.
Send your recovery story from the website.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are a few comments about Dan's comment. Penny says, it makes her hugely sad that our conventional medical practitioners are on the whole oblivious. She says she saw an article in the Telegraph the other day saying that COVID could cause chronic fatigue syndrome. Few people saying about them planting seeds but not receiving a great wait a minute. So yeah, so sorry, I'm getting these messages from Zoe. So yeah, so I mean, I haven't read that. Have you, about COVID causing chronic fatigue?
Interestingly enough, there was I did see the article. I think they're quite confused about post-viral fatigue and chronic fatigue are very different things altogether. So yeah, I think that when we're not as well informed as we perhaps need to be and could be. So it's about educating people all the time, and you and I both know that we have this wonderful support and educational tool and recovery system, but actually not everybody's there can hear it. No, because they have preconceived ideas or beliefs or whatever, that are a barrier to their recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also another thing I pick up then is them saying causes chronic fatigue syndrome. And then there's a difference, excuse me, the difference between a trigger and a cause. And I sometimes think of this as, for example, if I threw a bucket of water over you, you'd both get wet. So the cause of you getting wet is me throwing a bucket of water in. But how you respond, how you react could be very different. You might, with your kindness, sort of say, oh, I realise that you didn't mean to soak me, or whatever. The friend might be really, really angry. And it's the trigger. So hence people can develop chronic fatigue syndrome after having virus, because they've probably been like you anyway, rushing around, juggling everything, being that perfectionist, overly conscientious, and then they have a virus, and then bang, that triggers something, maybe chronic fatigue. But it's not necessarily, it's not actually the cause. Otherwise, everybody who has that particular virus would get the chronic fatigue, or everybody who got COVID would get the chronic fatigue.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so where are we now? Yes, okay, so some people are saying that they've been trying to plant seeds but not receiving a great response. Yes, I think we as practitioners all experience that as well, don't we, Carole? With our family, friends, as well as clients. I'm in the lucky position work-wise in that I only see people who present with TMS, mind body syndromes. But family and friends is different. And you can sow seeds, and sometimes they will come to fruition. I see many patients who come to me, and one even said to me that she'd thrown Dr. Sarno's book across the room the first time she read it. So there are people but I see many people who say, oh yes, I read about this years ago, but I clearly wasn't ready, and I just read it again and it's making sense. Or you start mentioning it to somebody who's coming, maybe there's an osteopath or physio who's doing its work but also doing hands-on, and they mention it, and it's not taken on board, so they carry on physical. But down the line, people sometimes then begin to question when they get pain, maybe why, when they wake up with pain, and you might have said, but why would you wake up with pain? You can't put your pillow, you slept on that for 1 or 2 years. So that might be then a time for them to begin to join the dots.
Yeah, I think that the hardest thing for anybody that's is in this particular place at the moment is that it's actually being receptive, you know, because actually they're so in where they are at the moment that their whole world, that is their world, you know, and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So it is just just drip and just they just might get it one day, but you know what, if they don't, then that's okay too, because we can only deal ourselves with what we can deal with at that time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not about trying to explain it over and over again and explaining it in a different way. It's meeting the person where they're at and maintaining that relationship, because the more you pushy about it, you can start having a negative reaction back. Okay, so Lucinda says, what is somatic healing? Well, it's somatic experiencing is a type of, and what we're doing is a form of somatic healing. Do you want to say anything about the somatic experiencing?
I would just say it's about engaging with the self, really. So to notice when things are happening and where they're happening inside you with those triggers. I suppose that's the simplest way I can put it. Yeah. So
I know Lucinda's on the webinars that we do. So what we're doing, Lucinda, when we're going through the webinars at the start of them, when we're doing emotional awareness, it's similar to somatic tracking, and any work with somatic experiencing, somatic tracking, emotional awareness is about understanding how, recognizing the sensations in the body, which generally we're not aware of, are we? We're still born with our eyes open, we're looking at all the time, and we're not aware of how we're feeling. And this is about developing our sense of interoception, our feeling, our sensations, how we're feeling. And the more we're able to do that and allow the sensations to just pass by and not block them or worry about them, then the less likely we are to fuel them. Which then brings me on to another question from Lucinda. I believe it's important not to track your progress. And that is what we're saying, really, because the more you track your progress, that's showing that it's fear-based, because you're looking at it and seeing what's going on. And the other thing is, if you look to the future and you're thinking, oh, I'm still not there, or you're looking at how you are now and just thinking, oh, I'm no better now, and in the future I'm not going to be, you know, am I ever going to be better? Whereas if you look backwards and recognize that, actually, do you know, I can now do this that I couldn't before, and I can feel I'm improving. So Lucinda's just wondering with you, I've lost the question now. Where is it? Wait a minute. Oh, that's because everything's moved. Okay, so she says, so I believe it's important not to track your progress. Were you aware of this within yourself?
I didn't ever have a vision of where I wanted to be. I only knew about what I'd had before. And I think that I thought at that time I wanted to be back with what I had before. But of course, that didn't serve me. No. So this is about letting go of all those preconceived ideas and just let it really organically kind of evolve based around who you are as you gradually get to know yourself, as you start to, you know, sort of feel inside yourself about what feels right for you. So it's not about being prescriptive at all, or saying, right, when I get over this, I want to be here. Actually, it's about a learning journey and just peeling away a bit like an onion. You know, you get those layers and you undo those layers, but just very gently, because if you did smash an onion open, you'd just be devastated. But just peel those layers, which you can cope with, you know, at a time. But don't put a time limit on it, because actually this is a lifelong learning process.
Good answer. Yeah, absolutely. And it is a journey. And the trouble is, the more we try and change things, the less likely we're going to make it, because we're creating resistance within ourselves. So like you say, it's about working on ourselves and then being authentic, learning from what we're doing. And then like you say, the direction might be different from the journey will take in a different route from what you're expecting. Although, having said that, if it's specific, like, I don't know, somebody's wanting to be able to go on a walk without pain, then absolutely imagining that and reinforcing
Yeah.
that and breaking the fear in it to walk in, and that's a process that you can do as well. But generally, yeah, I would agree. Great. Okay, so Penny says, do you think there's hope for a bigger shift in the way our medical profession thinks about this? Can I first of all say that I think there already is a shift, and when I think back to when I started this work in 2007, it was really hard work to actually be listened to by the medical profession for all, well, family and friends and anybody. And there has been a big change. There are so many more doctors and physios, osteopaths, psychotherapists who are now open to this. It's going to take time, but it's happening. And with the cognitive behavioral therapy becoming more popular, mindfulness becoming more popular, I think that's helped. That's definitely helped. And this episode now is probably going to help down the line. How do you feel about that, Carole?
Yeah, I definitely have heard a shift, in GP talk, definitely. And I think they feel really constrained within what they're able to do with the time allowed that they have as well. I'd like to see much more integration between the sort of psychotherapy and pain people and the emotional component as well as the physical component, but it will come, and it's like everything, it takes time, but we have come a long way, like you say, since even 2007.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's a much more awareness of this integrative approach to well-being and health.
And I think for GPs it's hard. We've got a few GPs who trained, and very hard to fit to help clients within like a 10-minute appointment. It's a challenge, and maybe and yet there was a television program, was it Horizon, that was actually showing the benefits of having longer appointments with GPs. So the evidence is there that actually when the GP listens, has more time to be empathic and listen to the patient, then the more the improvement is better. But that means a whole shift within the NHS. So that's going to take time. But yeah, so we are improving there, definitely. Okay, so Hayley says, it's interesting when you said your symptoms increased when you were having therapy. I find I get really anxious or a lot of symptoms when thinking of journaling or even seeing a practitioner. How did you work through this? And did you ever feel overwhelmed by the prospect of working through the emotional stuff?
Absolutely. I was in overwhelm for some time, and there comes a point where you put up a resistance or back out of going to see somebody, because actually there is the fear, obviously, there as well, that it's going to trigger those memories and those things that you were hoping to have forgotten or at least not dealt with at that particular time, or weren't able to deal with. So yes, there was fear around it. Trust was a big thing. It was finding somebody that I could work with, because a lot of it is around personality. When you go into this therapeutic alliance with somebody, I'm very conscious of the fact that for my clients that I will refer them to somebody else if I don't think it's working for whatever reason. I would recommend and say, you have to be a little bit careful, because they might think, oh, well, might be something wrong with me, but it's about how you explain that to them. And so I would sort of take the lead as the lead practitioner, but I've got a lovely team behind me as well that I can refer out to. So we sort of have a case study or whatever, and look for what is the most benefit for that person. So it's about building a trust relationship with the therapist that you're with. And as you start to learn to trust, because you're giving a lot to this one person that actually you don't know, and you've got that fear around you of judgment or whatever it is behind it, for why you're where you are. So yeah, it takes a long time to build up with somebody, that trust.
Yeah, no, I agree. And as you say, a therapeutic alliance has been showing, the evidence around that shows that actually the relationship with the client and the practitioner is far more important than whatever the practitioner does to that client. And so it is important. And that's why, certainly personally, that's why I do a 30-minute free call with everybody. People will say, oh, can I come and see you? Where can I book in? No,
Yes.
I don't take
Yeah.
anybody on until I've spoken to them, because I want to know I'm the right person for them. I want them to feel that they're the right person. That's why having set up SERPA and now having so many more practitioners trained gives me much more opportunity to refer on to somebody, for example, like you, if I feel that, okay, it's somebody with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue who would benefit from some psychotherapy, for example, then yes, then I would refer to somebody who is has experience in that. So I think it is, you're right, it's about getting the right person and building that trust, especially if somebody's had trust issues in the past. Take time. Okay. So Sonia says, I'm in the process of healing my chronic fatigue syndrome, and I'm also training as an equine facilitated learning coach. That sounds interesting. Do you have any experience, or have you heard of success stories of people who have worked with equine therapy in their healing process?
Absolutely. We have somebody, a referral practitioner as well, that we can refer to. Yes, it works, and it's a lovely process. So yeah, definitely it's about, as I said, working with that client on what is the best approach for them. And some people, you know, get such pleasure out of working with animals and horses. You know, and I mean, it's been documented, hasn't it, about taking dogs into you know, care homes and things. What a difference it makes to people's feelings of well-being.
Absolutely. No, so I'm glad you have experience. I don't personally, but yes, I know that it can be very beneficial. And I have, actually, I do know somebody who works as a coach who uses her coaching with horses, but not with medical problems, but as coaching and encouraging people to get out of their way, as trying to improve and do things. And it really helps them practice things there. Okay, another interesting question from Lucinda. Would you agree letting go of anger is critical for success in developing deep forgiveness, compassion?
The different types of anger. So there's anger and rage. Is a big difference between the two. Anger is when it's quick to, you know, come up at a situation, or you've got rage, which is long-term burn, if you like, and which causes us quite a lot of issues. If we push that down, that's where a lot of our pain comes from as well. So I would say, you know, look at it from that point of view. It's as about injustices, the real ones, and the perceived injustices as we go through life, and how we manage those, whether we deal with them at the time or we push them down, as to how we manage that anger and rage.
What you're saying is that expressing any anger healthily is important, because otherwise, like you said, we bottle it up, it doesn't serve us down the line. And and developing deep forgiveness, compassion. I think certainly self-compassion is really important. That's a priority within this work. I often suggest to people that if they can't reach a point of forgiveness, then initially to reach a point of acceptance. So, for example, that accept that something's happened actually stops you fighting against the fact that it's happened. And forgiveness is not about us condoning what somebody's done, but actually accepting that, okay, it's happened. You know, by going over and over again in our heads about it, or being angry or stuffing it down, there's that resistance to the fact it's happened. And there's a lovely book called Forgive for Good by Dr. Fred Luskin. And that explains it beautifully about how so much we're creating so much anger and not forgiving because we're trying to change things that can't be changed. And therefore it's about reaching that point of acceptance and forgiveness, so we can let go and move on. What would you say about forgiveness?
Yeah, I would say it's about compassion in there as well. You know, compassion for yourself. I would start with you rather than anyone else, because actually, it's, you know, they talk about, don't they, about putting your oxygen mask on yourself first, and actually
Yeah.
that is so right, because you cannot do anything until you're you feel yourself that I'm okay. And
Yes.
it's when you feel I'm okay that you can then start to let go of some of this stuff.
Yes.
So it is a big acceptance thing there, isn't there? Acceptance and compassion, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Something went through my mind then, and I can't remember it. So, what was it? No, I can't remember it. Okay. So Thomas says, do you use internal family systems in your practice yourself?
Yes, I do. I've used it with myself. I've obviously have gone through that whole process, so I know how it works. I can appreciate the nuances behind it as well. I don't use it with everybody. It just depends on that person, and what approaches I think would work best. I always individualize any treatment plan for that client. Yeah. It's not a one size fits all. Just depends where they are in the whole recovery process, really.
Okay, lovely. And Sonia says, would you suggest it could be beneficial to talk through childhood trauma with our parents where safe and possible? Or do you think that being able to soothe ourselves in this regard is more useful? I think what I would say, first of all, is that it's not a good idea to talk to parents or anybody about past trauma until you've looked at it yourself. Because if you have not dealt with it yourself and you're going to be reactive or judgmental or angry, that's not going to get you anywhere. Whereas actually, if we can address how we're feeling first. So an example of this was a patient of mine who she was really struggling to forgive her father and for his behaviour when she was younger. And she did journaling, she was practicing the emotional awareness, she used the loving kindness meditation that can be so helpful, meta health, where you're developing compassion for yourself and then you learn to express it towards somebody else. And she did all that before she even thought about talking to her parents. And then she actually thought one day when she was sitting with them, she just started asking her dad about his childhood. So she wasn't saying anything about her childhood, she just started asking about his. And she was really able to see then what a challenging childhood he'd had, how scared he must have been, and how he just hadn't the skills that she was learning to deal with things emotionally. And so he had shut down and was reactive and would get angry. But she could really see now that in the past, before all that had happened, he was a normal, innocent little boy. And that is where forgiveness helps, when you start to look at, and this is what I was thinking of before and forgot, is when you start looking at it from the other person's point of view. Even if you can't understand or condone it, it's recognizing that we are all born innocent. And we actually, if you look at people in prison, the majority of them have had adverse childhood experiences. We don't go out of our way to make our life miserable for our kids or be abusive to anybody without acting out emotions that we can't deal with ourselves. Do you agree?
I agree. I mean, it's very difficult. You can't put yourself in somebody else's shoes at all. Like you say, we have no idea what's made them the person they are today. So that's something I would just say, just to recognize that. I understand that you think, some people think for closure that they need to actually speak directly to that person to get an explanation. It's not going to change anything that's happened before. But one of the things that I've found really beneficial was to write the letter out, just letting it free flow, write that letter out, not send it obviously, but to do that. It then started to sort of, I don't know, in myself, it just sort of brought things down to a level where I could start to almost understand the reason, that some of the stuff that was behind what had happened, when I was growing up. I couldn't actually ask my parent because they were no longer alive. So that again, is another sort of barrier to to get through, overcome, or whatever, however you might like to put it. But I think there is if you feel very strongly about it, I would not advise going to a head-on conversation with somebody, because actually they're not going to be in the right place either.
They're not, and their perception might be completely different.
Yeah.
And I do remember somebody who did do this, having journaled, and she just felt that, you know what, I want to write to this person and tell him what I feel about what happened when we were younger. And unfortunately, he didn't take it very well. And then that therefore didn't just bring up stuff, sort of sort out anything from the past. It brought up the past stuff, as well as actually making things very, very challenging in the present moment as well. I would just, as Zoe's just mentioned, we've got it's getting on for 1 o'clock now, so we're going to start bringing it to a close in a moment. It has, hasn't it? So just so Louisa said, Carole, I just wondered if you ever experienced depersonalization or food intolerances as part of your illness. I certainly had food intolerances. Don't have them anymore, but carry on. Yeah,
I follow a gluten-free diet. I had horrific IBS, but also other health issues behind that. So yeah, I'm absolutely gluten-free now, and it works for me.
Okay. And certainly when years ago, my daughter and I had food intolerance testing, and there were a number of things we were intolerant to, but we're not now. I think that's, again, worth just noticing. Right, so I think that's it then. Thank you so much, Carole.
Thank you.
It's been fun. It's been interesting. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. And it's been really helpful. I know Dan's been listening in here as well, and Dan's our next person to come and speak to people in a couple of weeks.
Great. I look forward to that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, everybody.